Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, Scion, 2nd edition. This is a game that I've had a lot of requests to talk about, and I've often danced around the idea of doing it. Now, part of the reason is the obvious one. I work for Onyx Path Publishing, and therefore I have worked on Scion, or around Scion. Technically, I oversee Scion. So, talking about it as a reviewer is not something I'm really prepared to do. I think it would be a breach in professional etiquette if I started saying this part of the game's shit. But as I am a fan of talking up games, I realise I can do that. I can talk about what I like about Scion especially, and what I'd recommend to other people. One of the individuals who picked up The World Below when it was on BackerKit, a hard copy of The World Below, sent me evidence of doing so, reminded me that I should make a video about Scion. And so ask for a Scion review. I'm not going to give you a review of Scion Origin and Hero, but I am going to talk about Scion 2nd edition. So here we go. A bit of a preface here. I remember when I first picked up Scion 1st edition, Scion Hero, that was the first book in that line, and was desperately trying to merge it with the World of Darkness at the time. This is what you do. Obviously, I found broadly these systems were compatible, and then at a fine detail level, they completely broke apart. So I would incorporate vampires and werewolves as antagonists in my Scion games, but I wouldn't have them as playable options. But Scion 1st edition was a lot of fun. Mechanically, it sometimes failed to stand up to rigor, and 2nd edition does that a lot better. A hell of a lot better. I know there are lots of people who have occasionally came out with little bits and pieces about Scion 2nd edition to say they don't understand scale. Scale was always the part of the story path system that people seem to struggle with the most. And I think it's because there's the magnification element of mathematics there, and the fact there's a difference between narrative scale and the alternative. But for my money, Scion does have an understandable system, and you don't need to use all of it at once. Now, this is the first thing I want to say about Scion 2nd edition, before we even get into what the game is about. And I want to apply this to all of the story path games. So whether we're talking Trinity, Scion, they came from Dystopia Rising Evolution, is that Storypath works incredibly well as a system where you pick and choose the elements you want to focus on any given session. This is the trick. If you're a story guide running a Storypath game, have an idea before you go into your session of the kind of scene your players are going to be playing through at the start of the game, maybe even the whole session. If it's going to be an investigation scene, refresh yourself on the investigation rules. It's half a page of text. If it's going to be a chase, look that up. If it's going to be a combat, look that up. You don't need to read the whole thing every single time. You don't need to memorize it. Refer to it. It makes things a lot easier. Likewise, when talking about things like scale, well, yeah, you're dealing with a slightly different mathematical formula for handling your antagonist or the challenge that's coming up. If a building is falling on you, you are dealing with scale. If your character is only a hero, well, read it before the game. Have it on a piece of paper or your tablet or your phone right in front of you. So when things start, you can refer to it right there, right then. In my view, it isn't complicated, but I think when you take any kind of rule system as a whole, especially when your major frame of reference is World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness, and you move into story path with games like Scion, you may be looking for like-for-like comparisons, and those don't always exist. So anyway, that is a really odd way of starting a discussion of Scion, but it's something I wanted to get out of the way first and foremost. I think it's a good piece of advice, and you, yes, that's right, you, that one, need to follow it. Now, Scion 2nd edition, what's it about? Well, Scion is a game where you are playing the children, typically, of gods. You are Scions, S-C-I-O-N, of the gods. Which gods? Any gods. This is a game where all myths are true. You exist in the world with a capital W, and in the world, faith, belief, mythology, legends, monsters, gods, all of this exists in the same plane as far as the story guide and the players are concerned. do not, and this is me giving you another excellent piece of advice, do not feel obliged to throw everything in, because things can get overwhelming. It's a bit like when you run Vampire the Masquerade and the first thing you do is give a 30-page brief to your players to say, these are all the vampires in the city, this is their politics, these are their relationships. They don't need all that crap. What they need is what's in front of them. And so when I run Scion, for example, I ran it for my Patreon, one of my Patreon groups. We ran Origin all the way through to, I think, the end of Hero. And it was purely set in Hollywood, in the Hollywood area of Los Angeles. And so the only Scions they had to worry about were the other Scions in Hollywood. The only setting issues they had to deal with, the only challenges they had to deal with were what were right in front of them, because guess what, there were other Scions up in Vegas and going all the way up to Seattle, and down in San Francisco or wherever. This was just Hollywood. And when you expand beyond that, yeah, the world gets a little wilder, it gets a little weirder, but this is the world, the frame of reference for your characters. So if you don't want to have to deal with the various Slavic pantheons, if you don't want to have to put, I don't know, the Buddhist pantheon from Scion God into your games, then don't. You know, give them the options that are available in Origin and Hero. Give them the options that are available in Demigod if you want, or go further into Once and Future and other games. But my point, and this is where I'm addressing you directly again, is if you think a game like Scion is overwhelming because of its breadth of content, don't use all the content at once. No more than you would introduce a person to Vampire the Masquerade by throwing Kia Seed and Salubri at them in their first session. And if you did, you're bad at this. Sorry, I'm not gatekeeping, but you are. So anyway, this world is a world where myths are true. What that means is you're as likely to run into a satyr in the street as you are another human, and that shouldn't come as a great surprise. But in Scion, you can actually dial up the mystical nature of your game, if you like, the heroic nature of your game, and have it cloaked behind a masquerade, or have it only perceptible to people who are already touched by the divine, if you want, you know, go a little Grimm or Lucifer with it. With the book we recently crowdfunding, Mythic Shards, they're an entire genres, Dark Eras style, where, you know, this is your four-colour Scion, this is your Watchman noir style Scion, this is cyberpunk Scion, where those things are really ramped up. And I recommend you find the level that suits you and your group. Again, don't feel the need to play via a straitjacket that you don't feel comfortable in. I mean, I'm sure some people feel comfortable in straitjackets. There's probably a whole kink about that. But we won't get into that right now. That's another video, straitjacket kink. I expect one of you to look for that now. I imagine one of you will. But anyway. Anyway, in a game of Scion, one of the core ideas is apotheosis. Your characters are steadily building up to become gods of their own. And when they do, their parents, or other gods in their pantheon, may object to their presence. So by virtue of your getting better at your job, you may find yourself being stamped down upon by people who used to be your mentors. It's a pretty typical idea to explore, but it's also one that appears quite frequently in the myths from which Scion draws its inspiration. The idea of Ariadne, the best weaver in the world. Athena recognizes that, so in the end she rewards her by turning her into a spider. It's an excellent overall arc, but it's not one, again, you have to play. What you can do with Scion is keep it fixed to one tier. If your players really get on with the idea of playing as hero tier characters, or demigod tier, my favourite tier, in fact, of characters, you can run full-length Chronicles with that, because there are so many boons, so many knacks, so many birthrights available. These are your various power types in Scion that you can really play up the kind of Scion game you want to play. You do not have to follow the set course. What's more, because it isn't leading directly to a Ragnarok-style event in Scion First Edition, you know, there's no apocalypse on the horizon, the story you tell is very much your own. If you're a fan of mythology, and I think a lot of you probably will be, because I think when you get into RPGs, it's often via having a childhood immersed in things like Greek myths, Norse myths, Egyptian myths. Of course, if you're in America and you are native descent, you're likely to have very different myths. But the point being, a lot of children learn myths like they learn fairy tales, and both can be impactful. You know, the story of Perseus and the Medusa left enough of a mark on me that I remember it clearly, as clearly as I remember Alice's adventures in Wonderland. And there's no reason you can't merge the two in a game of Scion, because Scion deals not just with epic myth, but also fairy tales, with folklore, with weird stuff that's going on. If children are being abducted in the city, well, yeah, you're going to be knocking on some of the doors of people who you might suspect. But what happens when you start hearing that it is a Little Red Riding Hood type of figure or a big bad wolf type of figure? That can exist in Scion just as easily as your satyrs, your cyclopes, and your enormous wolfhounds, and so forth. I think what I particularly enjoy about Scion and its overall scope is really your options are limitless. And I think that limitless nature can be daunting to someone who is more used to linear play or hasn't role played before. Now, I could note back the advice I've already given you, but what I would instead say is what you, the story guide, need to encourage your players to do, or if you're a player, you need to encourage yourself to do, and your other players, is think about the journey you want your character to have. Think about the relationship you want your character to have with their divine parent. Are they a black sheep? Are they a prodigy or protege? Are they the apple of Zeus's eye? Or are they a threat to be tempered? And if they are, well, maybe Horus doesn't want anything to do with you, but that just means Set comes knocking and saying, well, maybe we can be friends. I'm your uncle. I'll look after you. I've got a few jobs for you. Set, of course, doesn't have to be an arsehole just because he is in Conan and, and Vampire the Masquerade, but you get the idea. By having an idea in mind, and we play with this with aspirations and deeds and things in the Scion system, you can start telling the stories you want to tell. You just need to communicate them with your story guide. And if you need more linearity, if you need an alignment-like system to determine how you're going to play your games of Scion, you have virtues. Virtues are something that are introduced early on in the Scion 2nd edition books. We occasionally touch on them, but really they are an option for play. And what they do is they determine, based on who your divine parent is or what your pantheon happens to be, the way you are likely to conduct yourself and the way you can get rewarded or punished for conducting yourself. I would suggest more like a road system than a humanity system, but I put it more closely to alignment. And I'm maybe controversially in today's gaming world quite a big fan of alignment. I like alignments. I think they encourage people, especially new role players, on how to game, how to play a character, and eventually they don't need them anymore, but they're great stabilizers. Virtues can be the same kind of thing. One thing I very much recommend new GMs or story guides of Scion to do is come up with a simple plot to start off your origin tier game of Scion. I ran a game for Dixie and Eddie of the Onyx Pathcast, my colleagues. It's still available to listen to, where our characters' origin tier Scions are in a hotel, and it's at a hotel on the seafront, and all of a sudden Poseidon basically decides to demolish it because he summons a tsunami to wash the hotel away because there is a relic in there that has been stolen from him by another Scion who is also in the hotel. It's a simple enough plot because basically Poseidon Adventure mixed with a towering inferno. It's a disaster plot. Your characters need to save as many people as they can. They also need to potentially get this relic back and present it to Poseidon, which by doing so won't just rescue people, will also earn you favor with the deity. Nice, simple, it doesn't require spectacular powers on display, which is why it's a good origin tier adventure, and it introduces you to the overall mythological nature of the world. You are having to perform a service for a god, or you're trying to take this relic away, maybe to present it to your own divine parent when you have your visitation, which will come. Likewise, I ran a hero game for one of my Patreon groups, which dealt with a portal being opened to one of the other worlds of the Aztec deities, and this was seeing it was Titan spawn. All kinds of Titan spawn was spilling out across Hollywood, wreaking havoc. And it was because something had been stolen, it's a typical trope, from these Aztec otherworlds, and they wanted to seize upon it, not because they wanted to return it to Quetzalcoatl or Tezcatlipoca and friends, or Huitzilopochtli, but because they wanted the power that this Montezuma's headdress could give them. It resulted, in the end, our hero tier characters ending up finding that the Titan spawn were summoning an enormous swollen head of Montezuma, with his scalp bloody and ripped to shreds, where his headdress had been basically removed, pried from him, because this was just an effigy at first, and it was being brought back to life because the Titans believed that the Aztecs needed to receive a second load of punishment by bringing their most, infamous leader back to a form of life as a mythological creature. It was quite a complicated plot, but what I wanted to get to the bottom of by describing this to you is you can make these things horrific, you can make these things fun, you can make them legendary, epic, adventurous. Scion is such a broad spectrum of genres that, just as myths are, there are plenty of myths that are really disturbing, and there are plenty of myths that are just all out fun. Some are moral lessons, some are just jokes told around a campfire, that I think you can do a lot with Scion 2nd edition. Origin and Hero are where you want to start. I really recommend Demigod because, in my view, Demigod is the best Scion book. Scion God is fantastic as well, but Demigod holds a place in my heart. It is my ideal tier of Scion games, and I ran more Demigod tier games, oddly, because I just tell my local groups, because I have plenty at this point, shall we just play Scion Demigod? And they say, can we start Origins here? And I say, well, you can do this, this, and this with Demigod. And that's when I start reeling off some of the amazing powers that you have at your disposal in Scion Demigod that make you start feeling like a demigod. Now you're no longer just a hero. Now you can shake worlds, you can enter other planes, other realms, and you can really start, shaking the foundations that your divine parents are built up on. So, all of this rambling discussion aside, you asked me to review Scion 2nd edition, Origin and Hero. All I can say, it's a game I have had tremendous fun with, and it's a game that I feel has infinite scope for fun and possibilities. The stories you can tell, you can create new myths, or you can retell old myths with your characters in the driving seat with Scion 2nd edition. And for me, that is a wonderful selling point. The sheer number of pantheons and gods that are in this game at this point, even if you are just a fan of mythology from an enthusiast perspective, these books are great to read, because so many of us got into this kind of thing because we wanted to know about Zeus and Thor and Tezcatlipoca and others, Amaterasu and more. So, and apologies for any mispronunciations there. So yeah, that is basically what I wanted to say. Please give Scion a go. If you haven't already, pick up Scion 2nd Edition. Origin and Hero are a good place to start, of course, but work your way to Demigod because you're going to have so much fun with that one, in my personal view. And if you do like the Story Path system, you will find the Story Path Ultra system. Storypath Ultra is currently, we have a core manual for Storypath Ultra, so this is like a setting agnostic Storypath Ultra book, like Chronicles of Darkness in a way, or Mithras, or even Fates, or something like that, or BRP. We have the Storypath Ultra core manual on BackerKit right now. We're doing crowdfunding. It's already smashed through 400% of its funding target. It's unlocked loads of stretch goals. This isn't the reason I'm making this video, but it is worth my pointing it out, because Storypath Ultra is a revision to the Storypath system that Scion 2nd Edition uses, but you can very easily use the material in the Storypath Ultra core manual to start adjusting Scion to, well, Storypath Ultra as you see fit. It is an excellent refinement of the system. It's also the system that Curseborn is going to be using, which, of course, we are crowdfunding on Kickstarter in October, linked below, as always. But we also use Storypath Ultra in The World Below, in At the Gates. It also even appears in They Came from the RPG Anthology. So, yeah, Storypath Ultra is the modification to the Storypath system, and if you want to see it before a new edition of Scion, should we happen to make one, then the Storypath Ultra core manual, or indeed Curseborn, is a good place to find it. Anyway, that's Scion 2nd Edition discussed at length. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.